Jai Gurudev, and welcome to Chapter 12 of this Level 2 Bhagavad Gita course. Chapter 12 is called Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion, and it is the smallest chapter in the Bhagavad Gita. I'd like to say it's because the point is very clear and there isn't much to discuss or debate about it. Bhakti Yoga is the best. Now, we're going to go pretty much through almost every verse in this chapter because it's so small, only 20 verses. It merits sort of a deep dive in almost each one of the verses. So in verse number 1, Arjuna is speaking to Krishna, and Arjuna says, "Between the devotees who worship you, meditating on you in the way described, and those who contemplate on the imperishable, impersonal aspect of you, who is superior?" So to make the question clear, Arjuna is basically presenting two different groups of people with two different theological conceptions of the Lord. Firstly, the devotees who worship you, meditating on you in the way described. So in the way described, meaning the form as it has been described. And then the second group, those who contemplate on the imperishable, impersonal aspect of you. Who's superior? The devotees of the form or the contemplators of the impersonal? So the non-form version of God, formless. Lord Krishna answers in verse number 2. Lord Krishna says, "In my opinion," which I always find hilarious, that Krishna has opinions rather than stating facts. He is the supreme reality himself. Lord Krishna says, "In my opinion, those who are forever absorbed in me with strong faith and worship my personal form, with focused minds, are on the highest path." So here he makes a very, very clear statement. Those who worship my personal form with strong faith, of course, and a focused mind, which one has to develop through sadhana, through convictions and practice. Remember, chapter 6, control the mind, dhyana yoga, meditate on the Lord. But such persons are on the highest path. Highest means highest. There is no other way to interpret this word. It means, therefore, the best path. And this creates, once again, another hierarchy in the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is full of hierarchies in such a way that a lot of people sometimes become uncomfortable with them. The reason being is because, especially among spiritual people, there is almost this tendency, this pressure to create states of equality all the time. We want things to be as equal as possible because we believe that inherently people are all equal. And that is true. And so that belief is a true belief that is then taken out of context and wrongly implemented or wrongly applied onto categories and things which are not equal and therefore should not be treated in that way. So I'll give you an example. All souls are of equal value. That means that there shouldn't be any segregation based on race, on gender, on sexual preference, or any of these things. True. However, going beyond the realm of the value of people or the worth of a soul to the realm of ideas, which are nothing but mental compositions of a series of choices and perceptions into a coherent thing called the theory or a philosophy or a methodology or whatever you want to call it. Those things are clearly of a different nature and in a hierarchical situation. Why? Because some are better in achieving certain outcomes than others. How do we know this? We know this because Krishna speaks about, for example, the three gunas of sattva, rajas, and tamas, and he speaks of them not as being equal, but as being distinct from one another. So distinction literally does away with equality, because what it does is that it creates a situation in which, if the purpose of life is set, and the purpose of life is to attain Krishna's eternal abode, and one of them is better suited to serving the individual striving to achieve that purpose of life than another, then clearly that one is the better one. And that creates a hierarchy in which sattva is better than tamas. Factually. The very beginning of the Gita is creating a hierarchical conception of us as being spiritual versus material. Our spiritual self is superior to our material one. The soul changes bodies like the body changes clothes. So body is superior to clothes, soul is superior to body. Krishna creates hierarchies between the practices. He says, although karma yoga and jnana yoga are ultimately the same, I recommend Karma Yoga. Why? Because it is superior. It is superior in what sense? Not in terms of superior outcomes. The outcomes are the same. That's the point of equality. But the point of differentiation, which then creates a hierarchical situation, is that Karma Yoga is more practical. It's easier to engage with, which makes it more accessible, and that makes it superior. Krishna makes that clear. He lists the different types of practitioners. You know, this one is better than that one is better than this one, but the yogi is better than all of those. Therefore, O Arjuna, become the yogi, chapter 6. But above the yogi is even the bhakta, also chapter 6, right? So he's constantly creating hierarchies, which is essentially putting ladders in front of us as the seekers, as the devotees, for us to climb. Therefore, without falling for the trap of putting people on a hierarchical position, because we are not fit to do that, learn the various hierarchies from the Gita that Krishna has outlined and subscribe to them and try to climb that hierarchy as quickly and as truthfully and sincerely as you can. Don't convince yourself because of your own sort of predilections, affinities or aversions that any form of equality exists between the various methodologies and paths towards God. They don't. Just as there is no equality between the gods. It's not to say, oh, you know, Narayana and Shiva, it's the same. One, you know, if you prefer Shiva, great, good for you. You know, Narayana is not better. Yes, he is. Better in the sense that he is original. He is the supreme personality. He is the supreme Lord. He is the supreme being. Shiva is not those things. Shiva is a modification of that supreme being, a manifestation of that supreme being. But he is not the original person. That's Narayana. That's a hierarchical position. Yeah, that is a clear hierarchical situation. And those hierarchies ought to be climbed. Krishna's making another one here. It's not so simple as to say, worship the Lord. And anybody who worships the Lord is therefore worshipping in a equally valid manner. No, they are valid, but not equally valid. That is not Krishna's teaching. So, for example, it can be said that a Muslim is worshipping the Lord. A Christian is worshipping the Lord. A Jew is worshipping the Lord. A Hindu is worshipping the Lord. But what kind of Hindu? An Advaitin, a Shaivite, a Shakta, a Vaishnava. Yeah. All kinds of possibilities exist. Are they not valid? No, they're all valid. Are they equally valid? No, they're not equally valid. I'm not going to place all of those religions on a hierarchy. That's not made in the Bhagavad Gita, and this is a Bhagavad Gita course. But the two things that are presented here are impersonal versus personal. Krishna says personal is the highest path. So you need not really concern yourself with what order the other religious paths fall into beneath it. You only need to know that the worship of the personal form, as described in the Bhagavad Gita, is the highest path. Therefore, if you wish to be on the highest path, just go to that one. Verses 3 and 4. But those who contemplate on the imperishable, the indefinable, the unmanifest, omnipresent, inconceivable, transcendent, unchanging, immovable, impersonal aspect of the truth, having subdued all their senses, remaining equal-minded and engaged in the welfare of all beings, they too eventually come to me. So please note, again, he's not denying that the impersonalists will come to him. So he's not invalidating, and that's the same thing. Remember Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga. He says they both reach the same outcome, just one is better than the other because it's easier to practice. So here, he's making a slightly different suggestion, although there are some similarities. He says that the impersonal path, they also come to him eventually. So this eventually suggests that it takes longer. So again, like Jnana Yoga, it seems less practical. Okay? So less practical, but you do come to him. But the following question must be asked, and this is something that is answered by various acharyas, including Guruji. What aspect of him do we come to? Because the impersonalist, the one who worships God in a formless state, comes to him as Brahman. Brahman is a modification of God. It is an aspect of the Lord, but it isn't Bhagavan, right? Brahman is a unique aspect of the Lord. It is the Lord, so the statement holds true. They eventually come to me. But the question arises, is there a hierarchical situation between Brahman Paramatma and Bhagavan. No, in terms of Tattva, there isn't, because the same being that is Bhagavan is Paramatma and is Brahman. There is no difference, therefore, in nature. But is there a hierarchy in terms of the experience had by the jiva interacting with that form? And the answer is yes. The reason being that prem, or love, is only the byproduct of the interaction between the jiva, the Atma, us, and Bhagavan. To an extent, Paramatma, but mainly Bhagavan. It is not the outcome of an interaction between us and Brahman, because Brahman is devoid of form, is impersonal, and therefore no relationship, no personal relationship can be established with it. Therefore, love, which is the willing expression of our inherent bliss towards one another, so two personalities engaging in a communion of bliss resulting in prem, love, that is not possible with Brahman. Therefore, although there is no difference in nature between Bhagavan, Paramatma, and Brahman, because they manifest themselves differently, the experience or the byproduct, the outcome of an engagement between Atma and Bhagavan is different from the result of an engagement between Atma and Brahman. And therefore, once again, a hierarchical situation has been established. Yeah. And those, again, I reiterate, these hierarchies are fundamental to properly understand the Bhagavad Gita. So now moving on to verse number 5. But greater is the difficulty of those whose minds are attached to the impersonal truth. For those who are embodied, that path is filled with suffering. So clearly he makes the point that I made earlier, which is that it's just not as practical. And now he's given the reason why it's not practical. The reason why it's not practical for beings like you and I, material beings in this material universe, to contemplate on the Lord in a formless way is that you have to deny your own state of existence. The path is filled with suffering. Why? Because you are a body. You have senses. You have a form. And you have to, in a sense, negate those things in order to conceive of yourself and then the origin of yourself, the source of yourself, as being devoid of form, devoid of attributes, devoid of all the things that you currently have. And so it's almost like they are an obstacle to your spiritual endeavors, not an aid. So your physical needs, the fact that you have to sleep, the fact that you have to eat, is a hindrance. Because what is your eating process aiding you in your contemplation of the impersonal Brahman? Nothing. But as a personalist, that is no longer the case. Because as a personalist, you can take your need of food and cook something for the Lord, offer it as prasad, and then consume it, meaning that you not only fulfill your need for food as a materially embodied being, but you've done it as a devotional act of engagement with the Lord in which devotion was expressed, right? And therefore experienced as a reciprocated outcome. So therefore, yeah, the path of personal worship and personal engagement with the Lord is more conducive with the reality that we experience as embodied beings. Because if we have a body and a form, we understand better how to engage with another body and form, even if it is a transcendental one. And Krishna echoes this, verses 6 and verses 7. But for those who love and surrender all their actions to me, who worship me with exclusive devotion and fix their mind on me alone, for such people, Arjuna, who have their consciousness absorbed in this way, I quickly deliver them from the ocean of birth and death. I quickly deliver them. So he speaks in a way that he did not speak for the impersonalist. In the impersonalist description, even when he validated it in verses 3 and 4, he never said, I will come to their aid, I will grant them this or that. He says, they eventually too will come to me, meaning that they will achieve Brahman realization by their own means to some extent, right? Or at least much more so in comparison to this, because here he maps out the idea that I quickly deliver them from the ocean of birth and death. So when somebody loves him, is devoted to him, is dependent on him, surrenders to him to some extent, Krishna is basically saying, I reciprocate. I come to that person's aid and I therefore deliver them. And this echoes Krishna saying that he takes charge of the prosperity and welfare of those who surrender unto him and who are fully focused on him, right? He has already said this, and this is echoed once more here. So now let's go to verses 8, 9, 10, and 11. Verse number 8, place your mind on me alone and let all your understanding be absorbed in me. Then without doubt you will dwell in me. So it's single-pointed devotion. This is one of the unique characteristics of devotion. Devotion is not something that can be expressed as long as there is competition between the object of devotion and other things. Because as long as there are other things competing with the object of our devotion, it means that we do not have this single-pointedness, this single-minded devotion where our minds are absorbed, all our understanding is absorbed in Him. And so there is almost like a responsibility on the bhakta to make the Lord, as much as possible, the sole objective of our lives. That doesn't mean the sole engagement. We can engage with many things in life, but the goal, the objective, the thing which we are aiming towards should, ideally for a Vaishnava, only be the Lord. Yeah? So one may ask, well then what does it mean to have a family or to have a job? It's like, well, all those things can be viewed in light of the goal of attaining the Lord, meaning that they are all done simply for the service of the Lord, nothing else. So that doesn't compromise the goal of acting and living for the Lord's sake, thinking of Him, rooting our understanding in Him, being devoted to Him, placing our mind on Him. That's all possible, even though you have all those other things, as long as those things are viewed in light of that relationship. Verse number 9. But if you are unable to center your mind on me, then seek to reach me, O Arjuna, by constantly practicing yoga. So constantly practicing yoga means what? The yoga of chapter 6. In chapter 6, Krishna describes yoga as being a detachment from the fruits of one's actions. So this is karma yoga, but also, in a sense, a renunciation of the impulse, the desire to act in a material sense in the first place, which has a hint of jnana yoga to it. And then lastly, the third element of chapter 6's definition of yoga is to control one's mind. And one does that through either the practice of meditation, but for example, fasting, many different practices. Even our japa kriya is designed to do that. So, renouncing attachment to the fruits of the action, renouncing the desire-based motivation to act or impulse to act, and controlling our minds. This is a practice that we can do that is second best in case we are not already capable of simply placing our minds on the Lord. This is a point that Ramanuja makes. So Ramanuja's definition of bhakti is much more severe. In Ramanuja's world, only the first instance is bhakti. Only when we can absorb all our mind on the Lord and have all our understanding rooted in Him are we truly experiencing and practicing bhakti. If we are incapable, so this second degree here, verse 9, when Krishna says, if you are unable to center your mind on me, then seek to reach me by constantly practicing yoga. In Ramanuja's interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, that's already a step down from bhakti. So he says, do bhakti yoga, but if you can't, then do yoga, meaning karma yoga or jnana yoga or something else. So for him, this is no longer bhakti. Verse 9 down, right, in terms of recommendations. Guruji doesn't necessarily hold that belief, meaning that Guruji is more lenient in the sense that he acknowledges the validity and reality that sadhana bhakti has, which is an experimental bhakti, a part in which we are practicing bhakti, even though we are not reaching the heights of bhakti and what bhakti truly is in essence. We are practicing a version of it, and by practicing it, we are sort of developing our capacity to then tap into the purest form of bhakti, which he doesn't there at that point disagree with Ramanuja, but he would still term the lower efforts towards bhakti as being bhakti too. We just make this distinction between sort of sadhana bhakti and para bhakti or prema bhakti, right? These are distinct types of bhakti. And I don't mean in terms of the way in which they're expressed, which would be the Navada Bhakti, the 9 forms of Bhakti. I mean it more in the quality of the Bhakti. So Sadhana Bhakti versus Prema Bhakti or Para Bhakti is a qualitative distinction, okay? Not a distinction in terms of expression or variety, which is what the Navada Bhakti, the 9 forms of Bhakti are all about. Verse number 10. But if you are unable to practice this yoga, then devote yourself to serving me, for even by dedicating your actions to me, you will attain perfection. So again, here he says, so fix your mind on me, that's the best. If you can't, then try to practice some yoga, try to gain self-mastery, self-control. If you can't do that, then just act and dedicate to me. So a simplistic karma yoga, right, without the other additions. And then verse 11, but if you are unable to even act in remembrance of me, then to gain self-control, renounce the fruits of every action. So, to correct myself, verse 10 is a simplistic karma yoga with an element of bhakti because you're dedicating the actions to Him. And in verse 11, it's the most basic, simplistic karma yoga, which is basically just renounce the actions. You don't even have to offer them to him. So I'm going to repeat the hierarchy, the scale. So the best is to have, as outlined in verse 8, to have your mind placed on Krishna alone, have your understanding absorbed in him. Point. Best. The second best is to practice yoga. What is yoga? It means renouncing the fruits of your action, not having any impulse to act based on any kind of material desire or material engagement, and controlling one's mind and fixating it on the Lord gradually, right? So third, if you can't do that, the third best option is to act in service to God, which is basically karma yoga with a tinge of bhakti, which is just act, do whatever you have to do, even if it is materially motivated, but just take the outcomes and offer them to Krishna. And if you can't do that, the fourth best is just act in detachment. Even if you can't offer them to Krishna, if you can't do away with the material motivations, then simply act without attachment. The most basic sort of mundane version of karma yoga. Okay? So I hope that hierarchy is clearly explained. Once again, a hierarchy, as you can tell. So, let's move on to verse 13 and 14. Verse 13, the person who has no hatred towards any living being, who is friendly and compassionate to all, who is free from the notions of I and mine, who regards pain and pleasure with equanimity, who is forbearing, contented, who is constantly contemplating, self-restrained and firm in one's own convictions, dedicating his mind and intellect to me, such a devotee is dear to me. So this idea, this is verses 13 and 14. This last sentence, such a devotee is dear to me, the Sanskrit is Yo mad bhakta same priyaha, famous expression, because Krishna goes on now for about 6 to 7 verses, basically describing the devotee that is dearest to him, or the devotee that is dear to him in general. And it is, as you could tell from this, for want of a better expression, quite an intense description in the sense that difficult to reach, difficult to live by those high standards. I'm going to repeat them again, just verses 13 and 14. The person who has no hatred towards any living being, who is friendly and compassionate to all, who is free from the notions of I and mine, who regards pain and pleasure with equanimity, who is forbearing, contented, constantly contemplating, self-restrained, and firm in one's own convictions, dedicating his mind and intellect to me, right? I'm not going to go through each one of those points, but for example, the first 2 or 3, no hatred towards any living being, friendly and compassionate to all. What is that the byproduct of? So instead of chasing that, so for example, instead of looking for every person that you potentially hate and thinking, I must not hate this person, I must not hate this person, I must not hate this person, think of it differently. Think, what is the symptomatic issue? What is the illness that allows me to hate someone and prevents me from naturally being friendly and compassionate to all beings? The answer is the notion of independence. The notion that I am an independent being from all of you. And the correction is therefore the understanding, the profound understanding that we are an interconnected organism. That I am inevitably and eternally connected to all of you. And we are all amshas, parts of the same one source organism, which is Narayana. Therefore, what am I doing in having hatred for myself? For parts of myself, for parts of a shared body? It's like my left hand hating my right hand. It doesn't make any sense. And so a proper, solid, deeply rooted understanding of this holds the potential to, if not necessarily promote kindness and compassion towards everyone else, at the very least, it should help us in eradicating the animosity and the hatred and the sort of irrationality behind all of this. We may still have the remnants of these attachments and these tendencies, these samskaras, to see people as being, us versus them, and all of these sort of material divisions that exist. But spiritual vision unites, material vision divides. On a material level, we have countries, nationalities, accents, gender, skin color, race, hair color, eye color, so many things that segregate us into groups and divide us. Whereas on the spiritual platform, for Shishta Advaita, qualified oneness, we see it, we only talk about unity, harmony, oneness, togetherness. So these are very, very, very different mindsets. And so a lot of these qualities that Krishna says make a devotee dear to him are qualities that you don't have to necessarily chase on a one-to-one level and try to cultivate, but rather by having certain corrective understandings about reality, those qualities are much more likely to naturally emerge in you, or the deficiencies to naturally dissolve from you. So these are some of the important examples that I think really illustrate the point. And this goes on, verses 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. I'll give you a couple of examples. Verse 15, he who does not disturb the world and is not disturbed by the world. So if you cause worry to the world, or if you are worried by the world, you should not be, right? So this is a devotee that's dear to Krishna. He also says, one who is free from expectations is dear to him. One who has renounced material pursuits is dear to him. Verse 17, one who renounces both enjoyable and vile objects, meaning that, their renunciation is sincere, because they're not just saying, I renounce things that I don't like anyway. Anybody can do that. So, sincerity basically is something that's dear to him. And he goes on and on. And in verse 20, which is the final verse of chapter 12, and I think it really sort of culminates this sort of description of the devotee that is dear to Krishna. He says, but those devotees who practice this immortal teaching with full faith as taught by me, and who regard me as the supreme, are exceedingly dear to me. So especially dear. So that should interest us, because what has Krishna done once again? Created another hierarchy. So these devotees are dear to me, but this devotee, as described in verse 20, is exceedingly dear to me, which means more dear. Yeah? Now you may challenge that and think, well, wait a minute. Doesn't God love everyone the same? Yes, but we're not talking about love. He didn't use the expression love. He said dear. Another synonym for dear is liked, right? Or appreciated, or whatever. So yes, it's true that God loves everyone equally. It has never been stated that he appreciates or likes everybody equally. This is not a statement that is made about God, because not everybody's behaviors are equally likable or equally commendable. Whereas the one who is actually the essence of that being, the soul, which is often not participating in these behavioral decisions, is what God loves in an equal and immeasurable manner. So I want to make that super, super clear. God loves everybody the same, because we are all, in essence, souls, and those souls are perfect and pure, and God therefore loves them perfectly. But who we are on a day-to-day basis is not just our soul. It's this enjoyment of soul and body and mind. And is it as fair to say that people's minds are equal in the same way that people's souls are equal? No, no way. My soul may be equal to yours, but my mind is certainly not equal to yours. Yours might be better, or mine might be better. Yours might be more knowledgeable, or mine. Yours might be more disposed towards a right way of conducting yourself, a devotional way of conducting yourself, than mine. That does create hierarchical situations. That does not create a sense of equality. And therefore, God has more affinity, in a sense, for those souls, those minds, those behaviors, those packages, the jiva, that are more finely attuned to God's will and to the right way of living than the ones who don't. That is an undeniable fact. It is the very reason why we can speak about the gopis as being exalted devotees, not just devotees. As Shiva being the supreme devotee, not just being a regular devotee, because there's distinction amongst devotees. Because what it means to be a devotee is a set of behaviors and a state of consciousness. People are not in the same state of consciousness despite having a consciousness that is equal. Meaning me and you may have a body, and so theoretically there is some sense of equality in that. We both have a body, but what I'm doing with my body and what you're doing with your body are different. One of us might be maximizing the body and therefore getting more out of it than somebody else that is being lazy. Therefore, are their bodies ultimately equal? The answer is no, because one is being used to a higher potential than the other, to a higher utilization, and therefore there are different consequences to that. So again, when Krishna says in verse 20 that these devotees that do it, that are practicing this immortal teaching with full faith as taught by him and regard him as the supreme are exceedingly dear to him, he is making a distinction and a superior categorization of these beings. Now, let's try to break this down a little bit. What does it mean to practice this immortal teaching with full faith as taught by me? It means that we carefully study the Bhagavad Gita. We carefully draw conclusions from the Bhagavad Gita as taught by Krishna, meaning not as interpreted by our own minds, first and foremost, meaning what are the direct instructions that he has given, not what are the interpretations that I have drawn out from it. Take that as priority and practice that. And we may then eventually, gradually, apply some perspective from our own lives and perceptions. Certainly, Guruji is as validly an interpreter as Krishna. So as taught by me, this does not exclude Guruji in our perception, because for us, Guruji is non-different from Krishna. So whatever clarification Guruji gives or extension Guruji gives in his commentaries is to be treated as non-different than Krishna's words. So when Krishna says, practice this teaching as taught by him, that includes any teachings that Guruji gives, but it does not include any teachings that we may give, that we may sort of interpret out of it. As I said, those are the last things to be added on as interpretations, as perspectives, based on our perception of the text and our perception of the realities described within it. So, to summarize chapter 12, it begins with a question from Arjuna: which is superior, the worship of God as a person or energy or consciousness, impersonal? Krishna definitively answers, the personal, those who worship the personal form are on the highest path. He then goes on to describe a hierarchy between the ways of approaching him, where he says that, single-pointed devotion to him is the best. If not, there are 3 steps below it that are still acceptable, recommended forms of engagement. After that, he describes the devotees that are dear to him. Yo mad bhakto same priyaha. The devotee that is dear to him is like this, is like that. And he starts to describe lots of the qualities that we have heard throughout the Gita so far, but it culminates in verse 20, where he says, but the one who follows this teaching of the Bhagavad Gita faithfully, as outlined by Krishna, is exceedingly dear to him. And this is going to be something that then is completely matched and made coherent by statements made by Krishna in chapter 18. So you have to bookmark this, because in chapter 18, he's going to talk about what is the best kind of service you can do onto others. And so if we come back to chapter 3, where he said, act for loka sangraha, this chapter now, where he says, following the Bhagavad Gita properly makes you the dearest to me. And then in chapter 18, where he's going to say what kind of service makes you the dearest to him, there's going to be an absolute coherence between these 3 statements. And I'm going to draw that out when we get to chapter 18 and make that abundantly clear. Chapter 3, chapter 12, chapter 18 have connecting dots that make not only our own spiritual life, but the way we should help others to engage in their spiritual lives abundantly clear. Jai Gurudev.